Hello and welcome to St Margaret's Lent services. I'm Evelyn, one of the worship leaders at St Margaret's, who are filling in for Reverend Maggie while she is on sick leave. Please hold her in your prayers as we are. This Sunday is the third Sunday in Lent, and we are continuing with the Eco Congregation Scotland videos. I hope you are finding them interesting and thought-provoking. God bless you this week and always.
If life hurts, you groan. It's involuntary and maybe it helps. Or maybe you're longing and you're thirsty, and then you cry out. Sometimes just cry out in case there's someone there to hear. But if you've got someone within reach to blame, then you might just slide back into grumbling. Better the devil you know, such a popular creed, even when all the information is there for a change of direction. But why, when there's also business as usual, that antithesis of crisis Christianity, the banquets and parties and weddings, the ghost-written royal biographies, until the flood comes and sweeps them all away. Better the devil you know, the oil and coal we have to dig, just such a tempting, comforting, deadly way of life, that desperately defended bondage of no other possibility. The folly of treading water rather than swimming to shore. So many straws which will break the camel's back, and which have I chosen? You could replace the gas boiler with a slightly better gas boiler. Buy a new diesel before they're phased out, so you can ride it for years to come. Hop on a plane for a cheap internal flight, although the train runs already on decarbonised electricity. At government level, continue stealthily to subsidise oil and gas, make steel even for turbines with coke, and dig for more rather than facing the brutal reality that such things can and must end. And so prolonging them is storing up misery for our own people, to say nothing of the harm already knowingly visited upon wildlife and humanity, in full sight, though bizarrely out of mind. Friends, thank God that is not the only story. There seem to be at least two closely related powers which can shift us where nothing else can. First, and sometimes tragically, it's immediate and present danger, and that's why I walk carefully on mountain paths, and why such minor injuries as I have sustained over the years have been in boringly mundane surroundings. But the other great power to change, which people of faith should be mindful of, is a recycling and repurposing of such faith as we do have. A rethinking of our priorities, a reshaping of our relationship with other creatures. Popes of this century have called for a global ecological conversion. But I wonder why so many in the churches are suspicious of what we seem to be called to, at least in the way we interpret these words of Jesus, to repent and believe the good news, even if the good news is a strident, urgent, otherwise unwelcome warning. For some, this would be an overwhelming awareness of the reality of God's love. For others, more abrupt. For Moses, the distraction from work of the burning, the blazing bush. For Paul, the short, sharp, rather unpleasant shock of the Damascus road, or the strange warming of John Wesley's heart. And for some fortunate and enlightened souls, there's even the blessing of careful, informed and reasoned decisiveness, which seems, although we're immersed like a fish in water by more than sufficiently convincing information, that seems to be less common than a hen's tooth. Looking at the book of Exodus, the plagues of Egypt should leap out as far more terrifying and contemporary than the Sunday school entertainment which I grew up with, or worse, the boring and dangerous tendency complacently to explain them away as, at best, just a run-of-the-mill natural disaster. Plagues like these are creation's response to injustice, sponsored by the Creator, though with the difference from our day that the oppressed are most definitely not passed over. For some it's been an obstacle to faith, and well it might be, that the innocent, even among the Egyptians, suffer because of the guilty. Fellow creatures are wiped out for human greed. Pacific Islands suffer seawater inundation. For me, though, it's far more urgent and realistic to cry out for the help, solidarity and empowerment of God in the time of trial, rather than retreat into a peevishness about the absence of a perfect world, a plastic Jesus, and a God who will sort it all out without us lifting a finger, or indeed scientists who'll do the same. You can speculate as to whether bird flu would have nearly wiped out some wild species without our concentration of domestic poultry, but response is more urgent than the luxury of speculation. Plagues are an avoidable response to persistent and intentional injustice, a response expressed through ecological hazards increasingly familiar in our day: choking air pollution, disruption of food, water, livestock, freak weather, overwhelming outbreaks of disease that cross natural boundaries, and the completely unprecedented multiplying of pests. And it's the overtly unprecedented character of the plagues that should make us sit up, neither natural nor uncaused, nor lacking in a trail of accountability. These things should be read as no more natural than the floods of Pakistan last year, extremes which cannot be written off as nature's version of business as usual. Now, having departed from the support network that is always the false friend of the enslaved, the Hebrews find they are abruptly thirsty. Our own water supplies are as crucial as theirs, alongside energy, on our list of what is essential to life. Energy, be it the strength that comes from eating well, the warmth that sees our elderly through the winter, and our reliance on the strength of fellow creatures. Energy in immediate demands that life makes on us for being alive. Our appointed snippet from Exodus is a taster of a narrative which is shot through with the ongoing battle to convince both the just and the unjust to take notice of two, sometimes overlapping priorities. First, what will help them, but also what, because there's justice involved, will be pleasing to God. The strategies for becoming and remaining a trusted messenger involve creativity and realism, craftiness, openness, theatre and empathy for your audience. How many messengers today will share in the cross of Christ, that extreme version of the fate of those who warn in love? Of the Hebrews it is remarked, they did not heed Moses because of anguish of spirit and of cruel bondage. But blame is still the biggest game in town, and in the early chapters of Exodus, Pharaoh has played it with alacrity. Above all, muddying the waters to undermine trust in Israel's God, just as oil and gas companies, and now it's clearly established, concealed their own research in the outcomes we are now experiencing. And their active sponsorship of climate denial to undermine trust in those struggling to discern and tell the truth about the crisis. As Pharaoh convinced the Hebrews to blame Moses for Egyptian oppression, time will tell whom our public will blame for the industrial action this year, and those who are delayed or inconvenienced at the sharp end of the strikes can swing either way. And for all the oddities of Exodus, and there's many, there is much we can identify in a union of nations where the overarching threat of brutal climate change is obscured by the despairing glamour of business as usual. And if those earlier chapters of Exodus show anything, it is that we need some far more terrifying way of describing that toxic and deadening inertia of business as usual. Maybe something proverbially ridiculous, like the flesh pots of Egypt. Laughter is a legitimate tool of prophecy. For this is a globally dangerous situation which should provoke not just groans, not just outcry, but urgent alarm without room for nostalgic grumbling, which shackles and locks us in to what we still underlyingly long to be free of. And despite the amazing opportunity for Scotland of COP26 on our doorstep in 2021, must it take the spike of a truly major incident, bringing with it the most profound of spiritual experiences, to shift what statistics and surveys, it seems, cannot? And if you, hearing this, are communities of faith, then perhaps it is for you to lead the way with love and hope and forgiveness. And that's what faith is for when despair is the norm. Give a lead by sobering comparison and for warning. In those early chapters, once the Hebrews had slipped from their neighbourly partnership with the Egyptians into everyday servitude, even the attempted extermination of their baby boys passed with barely a whimper, and it was only with the accession of a further generation of the Pharaoh, oblivious of the barest remnants of partnership with Joseph, then we hear their response to suffering reach that critical stage of groaning, and then even of prayer, or at least of crying out. There's an irony that it is Pharaoh who provides the tipping point, a change in working conditions, cutting off the straw, well, maybe that broke the camel's back, which shakes up the chain of events. We've traditionally opened Lent with stories of Jesus sparring with the devil, Satan, the tester, the tempter, the reasonable and convincing voice of a business of which Satan is content to see himself as ruler. The repeated grumbling of the people and their calling of God's bluff records a similar struggle. That with regard to what we call just transition, the transition will not be possible without justice. Transition is a must, but transition must be just. But birth comes with pain, and freedom starts with the pulling of the plug on the support systems of injustice. Then there is nostalgia, that rosy stock in trade of Satan. It kicks in, and history, even our own personal history, is rewritten as hard-forced labour, choking air, dying young, family life forced into the mould of shift work, is recast as the flesh pots of Egypt. The water from the rock is a story which is comforting in that it offers solidarity to anyone with a vision of a better world, of living in the lag, the in-between times, which threaten to stretch out indefinitely. The wilderness where Jesus held out until the angels turned up with the sandwiches. Transition, then, is no safe or soft option. Transition needs prayer, needs us to cry out for help. It is a time when the soul of reformers is in peril. Revolutionaries and liberationists throughout history have morphed into monsters with their sometimes violent attempts to contain the disenchantment of those they long to bring with them. The terror of the French Revolution, the massacre of the kulaks in Russia, the Cultural Revolution of China. For the people, the attractive thing about having your leader, though, is to have someone to grumble to. As time goes on, grumbling can become your identity. By the time you read through to chapter 17 of Exodus, you've lost count of the number of times people have blamed Moses and by extension of God. Moses, of course, as the go-to place in that wilderness where, since the people were confronted, despite liberation from slavery, by the still less negotiable prospect of hunger and even more urgently thirst. Now in Lent, though climate crisis is no longer a future prospect, give some thought and give some prayer for the cheaper, more fruitful way of change, for reading the signs and seeking the kingdom before your own water runs out.